The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as photographers gathered behind the iron gates, their cameras ready for a moment that would mark history. For 3 months the world had waited with bated breath, watching empty balconies and silent palace announcements. Today, that silence would finally break. Behind those ancient stone walls, two of Britain's most beloved royals were preparing to step back into the spotlight after battling the disease that touches millions of lives worldwide. This wasn't just another royal appearance, this was a testament to human resilience, a story of courage that would inspire nations, and a moment that would remind the world why the monarchy still matters in the 21st century.
What happened during those 3 months of silence?
How did they find the strength to fight their private battles while carrying the weight of a nation's expectations? And what would their return mean for the future of the British royal family? The first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and pink as palace staff moved with quiet efficiency through the corridors of Windsor Castle. Today was different from the countless mornings that had passed during the 3-month silence. Today, Catherine, Princess of Wales, would make her first public appearance since beginning her cancer treatment, alongside King Charles, who had been fighting his own battle against the disease. Sarah Mitchell, the palace's head of communications, checked her phone for the 100th time that morning. The media interest was overwhelming. News crews from around the world had been camping outside the palace gates since midnight, their satellite trucks creating a small village of anticipation. The story had captured hearts globally, not just because of their royal status, but because cancer touches everyone, regardless of title or crown. Inside her private chambers, Catherine stood before an antique mirror that had witnessed generations of royal preparations. Her reflection showed a woman transformed by struggle, yet strengthened by survival. The princess had always been known for her grace under pressure, but the past 3 months had tested her in ways she never imagined. The chemotherapy had been harsh, stealing not just her famous chestnut hair, but also the effortless energy that had made her a natural at royal duties. Her personal secretary, Emma Thompson, had become more than just an assistant during the treatment. She had been a confidant, a source of strength, and sometimes simply someone to sit with in silence when words felt insufficient. Emma entered the room carrying a steaming cup of chamomile tea, Catherine's new morning ritual that had replaced her usual strong coffee. "The children are asking if they can come down to see you before you leave," Emma said softly. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had been Catherine's greatest motivation throughout the treatment. Protecting them from the harsh realities while being honest about her condition had been one of her greatest challenges. Catherine nodded, her hand instinctively reaching for the silk scarf that covered her head. She had made the difficult decision to appear without a wig, choosing instead elegant scarves that had become her signature during treatment. It was a choice that spoke volumes about authenticity over appearance, vulnerability over vanity. Down the hall, King Charles was having his own moment of preparation. At 75, he had faced many challenges throughout his life, but cancer had humbled him in ways he hadn't expected. The diagnosis had come just months after his coronation, a cruel irony that wasn't lost on anyone. His private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, had been fielding calls from world leaders, all wanting to know about the king's condition and return to duties. Charles stood in his study, surrounded by the familiar comfort of his books and paintings. The room smelled of his favorite lavender, a scent that had provided comfort during the darkest days of treatment. He picked up a leather-bound journal where he had documented his thoughts throughout the ordeal. The pages were filled with reflections on mortality, duty, and the strange gift that illness sometimes brings: clarity about what truly matters. Rebecca Harrison, the royal physician, had been instrumental in both their recoveries. She arrived at the palace early that morning for final consultations before their public appearance. The medical team had worked tirelessly to coordinate treatment schedules that would allow both royals to maintain some level of official duties while prioritizing their health. "Your Majesty," Doctor, Harrison said as she entered Charles's study, "your latest scans continue to show positive progress. The treatment has been more successful than we initially hoped." Charles felt a wave of relief wash over him. The uncertainty had been perhaps the most difficult part of the entire experience. Meanwhile, Catherine was sharing breakfast with her children in the private dining room. Prince George, now 11, had shown remarkable maturity throughout his mother's illness. He had taken on the role of protective older brother with a seriousness that sometimes broke Catherine's heart. Princess Charlotte, 9, had expressed her emotions through art, creating dozens of drawings and cards that now decorated Catherine's bedroom. 6-year-old Prince Louis, perhaps too young to fully understand, had simply wanted more cuddles, sensing somehow that his mother needed them as much as he did. William had been the family's rock throughout the ordeal. The Prince of Wales had seamlessly taken on additional royal duties while being a full-time caregiver and father. He had attended every medical appointment, researched treatments,
and somehow managed to maintain the children's routines.
His own stress showed in subtle ways, the slight tension around his eyes, the way he checked his phone constantly for updates from the medical team. As the family finished breakfast, Catherine felt the familiar flutter of nerves that had once accompanied every royal engagement. But this was different. This wasn't about protocol or perfect performance. This was about showing the world that vulnerability and strength could coexist, that royalty didn't mean immunity from life's hardest challenges. The decision about what to wear had been carefully considered. Catherine chose a deep blue dress, the color symbolizing hope and healing in many cultures. Her jewelry was minimal, her wedding ring, a simple necklace that had been a gift from William, and earrings that belonged to her grandmother. Every choice was intentional, designed to convey authenticity rather than grandeur. King Charles had opted for a navy suit, foregoing the elaborate ceremonial dress that usually marked official appearances. He wanted to appear approachable, human, relatable. His tie bore a subtle pattern of oak leaves, a symbol of strength and endurance that felt particularly appropriate. The palace staff had prepared meticulously for this moment. Security had been heightened not just for protection but to manage the expected crowds. The route from the palace to their first engagement had been carefully planned, with multiple contingencies in case either royal felt unwell. At 10 o'clock, Catherine and Charles met in the grand foyer. They stood together for a moment. Two people who had shared an experience that transcended royal protocol. Charles reached out and took Catherine's hand, a gesture that spoke of mutual support and understanding. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice gentle. Catherine squeezed his hand and smiled, the first genuinely radiant smile palace staff had seen from her in months. "We've been ready for this moment since the day we were diagnosed," she replied. "Today we show everyone what courage looks like." As they walked toward the waiting car, palace staff lined the corridors spontaneously. There were no formal announcements or organized ceremonies. Instead, people who had worked alongside them for years simply wanted to show their support. The head chef wiped tears from her eyes. The security team stood a little straighter. Even the oldest members of staff who had seen decades of royal history felt they were witnessing something special. Outside, the world waited. Social media buzzed with speculation and support. Hash royal return had been trending globally since the announcement. Hundreds of people had gathered outside the palace gates, many carrying flowers and handmade signs. Cancer survivors from around the world had shared their own stories, creating a virtual community of support that transcended borders and social status. The car pulled away from Windsor Castle, carrying two people whose journey through illness had transformed them from royal figures into symbols of human resilience. As they traveled through the countryside toward their first public engagement, both Catherine and Charles understood that this day marked not just their return to public life, but the beginning of a new chapter in their royal service, one informed by personal struggle, strengthened by survival, and dedicated to using their platform to help others facing similar battles. The world was watching, but for perhaps the first time in their royal careers, that scrutiny felt like support rather than pressure. They were no longer just representing the crown. They were representing hope itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of the Royal Marsden Hospital as Catherine and King Charles arrived for their first joint public appearance. The choice of venue was deeply meaningful. This wasn't a glamorous gala or state ceremony, but a cancer treatment center where thousands of patients had fought battles similar to their own. The symbolism was powerful and intentional. Dr. Sarah Chen, the hospital's chief oncologist, had been treating patients at the Royal Marsden for 15 years, but she had never experienced the mixture of excitement and nervousness that filled the staff today. The hospital had been preparing for weeks, not just for the security requirements of a royal visit, but for the emotional significance of the moment. Many of the staff had been following Catherine and Charles's treatment journeys through carefully worded palace statements, and seeing them arrive healthy and smiling felt like a personal victory. As their car pulled into the hospital courtyard, Catherine felt her heart racing. Through the tinted windows, she could see patients and families gathered in the lobby, many wearing colorful scarves and hats that she recognized as the uniform of those undergoing chemotherapy.
These people understood her journey in a way that most of the world couldn't. They had faced the same fears, endured the same treatments, and celebrated the same small victories that had marked her past 3 months.
Charles adjusted his tie nervously as they prepared to exit the vehicle. During his treatment, he had received thousands of letters from fellow cancer patients around the world. Their stories had moved him deeply. Tales of ordinary people showing extraordinary courage in the face of a disease that didn't discriminate based on wealth, status, or position. Today felt like an opportunity to honor those stories and acknowledge the shared human experience of facing mortality. The hospital doors opened, and they were greeted by Drs. Chen, and her team. The medical staff wore their regular uniforms rather than formal attire, reinforcing the message that this was about medicine and healing, not pageantry. Catherine immediately noticed a young nurse wearing a badge that read 5 years cancer-free, and she felt a surge of hope and connection. Their first stop was the children's ward, a decision that had been Catherine's specifically. As a mother, the thought of children facing cancer had been one of the most difficult aspects of her own diagnosis. She had spent countless nights thinking about parents who had to explain to their children why mommy or daddy was sick, who had to find strength they didn't know they possessed to help their children through treatment.
8-year-old Emma Wilson was waiting in the playroom when the royals arrived. She had been receiving treatment for leukemia for 6 months, and her parents had told her that a real princess was coming to visit. Emma wore a bright pink wig that was slightly crooked, and her face lit up with pure joy when Catherine walked through the door. "Your Royal Highness," Emma said, attempting a curtsy that was more enthusiasm than technique. Catherine immediately knelt down to Emma's level, her own headscarf sliding slightly as she moved. "Please just call me Catherine," she said softly.
"I love your pink hair. It's much more exciting than mine was before I got sick."
Emma's eyes widened with understanding and curiosity. "You were sick too?" Emma asked with the directness that only children possess.
"Yes, I was, just like you." "And look, here I am, feeling much better." Catherine's voice carried a warmth that made everyone in the room feel like they were witnessing something sacred rather than simply observing a royal engagement. Charles, meanwhile, was visiting with teenage patients in the young adult unit. 16-year-old Marcus Thompson had been diagnosed with bone cancer just before his final school exams. The timing had forced him to defer his university plans, and he was struggling with anger and frustration about his disrupted future. When Charles entered his room, Marcus was playing a video game, trying to distract himself from the anxiety of waiting for test results. "I hear you're an excellent student," Charles said, settling into the chair beside Marcus's bed. "What were you hoping to study at university?"
Marcus paused his game and looked up, surprised by the king's casual tone. "Engineering, Your Majesty."
"Though I don't know if that's still possible now." The uncertainty in his voice reflected the fear that many young cancer patients face, that their dreams might be permanently derailed by their diagnosis. Charles leaned forward slightly. "During my treatment, I had to postpone many plans. State visits, ceremonies, meetings that had been scheduled for months. It felt frustrating, like everything was being taken away. But then I realized that postponing isn't the same as canceling. Sometimes we have to take a different route to reach the same destination." They talked for nearly 20 minutes about Marcus's interests, his hopes for the future, and the video game he was playing. By the time Charles prepared to leave, Marcus was sitting up straighter, animated in a way his nurses hadn't seen in weeks. The conversation hadn't magically cured his cancer, but it had restored something equally important: his sense of possibility. In another wing of the hospital, Catherine was meeting with a support group for women undergoing breast cancer treatment. The group met weekly in a bright room overlooking the hospital garden, and today they had planned a special session to coincide with the royal visit. 7 women, ranging in age from 32 to 68, sat in a circle of comfortable chairs. Margaret Foster, a retired teacher who had been diagnosed at 65, spoke first. "Your Royal Highness, seeing you here today, looking so well, it gives us hope. We've all been following your journey through the newspapers, and knowing that someone in your position was going through the same things we are, it made us feel less alone." Catherine nodded, understanding exactly what Margaret meant. The strange thing about cancer is how it can make you feel completely isolated while connecting you to millions of other people at the same time. During my worst days, I thought about all the women who were having those same bad days. The women shared their stories, the fear of diagnosis, the challenge of telling their families, the strange new vocabulary they had to learn, the way treatment changed not just their bodies but their perspectives on everything. Catherine listened intently, occasionally sharing her own experiences. When 34-year-old Lisa mentioned struggling with hair loss while trying to maintain normalcy for her young children, Catherine reached up and adjusted her own scarf. "The children adapt faster than we think they will," Catherine said. "My daughter Charlotte started calling my scarves my pretty hats and asking if she could have some too. Children see love, not illness. They see strength, not weakness." After 2 hours at the hospital, Catherine and Charles reconvened in Dr. Ten's office for a private meeting about the hospital's research programs. They had both expressed interest in using their experience to support cancer research and patient care initiatives. The conversation was detailed and substantive, covering everything from funding challenges to breakthrough treatments being developed in the hospital's laboratories. Chen was struck by how engaged and knowledgeable both royals had become about oncology. Their questions are sophisticated, she later told her colleagues. This isn't just ceremonial interest. They truly understand the complexities of cancer treatment and the needs of patients and families. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Catherine and Charles stood together in the main lobby, surrounded by staff, patients, and families who had gathered to see them off. The atmosphere was emotional but uplifting. Many people were crying, but they were tears of joy and hope rather than sadness. Charles stepped forward to address the crowd informally. 3 months ago, Catherine and I were patients, just like many of you. We experienced the fear, the uncertainty, the physical challenges that come with cancer treatment.
We also experienced the incredible skill and compassion of medical teams like the one here at Royal Marsden. Today, we're not here as king and princess.
We're here as fellow travelers on a journey that none of us would choose, but one that has taught us profound lessons about courage, community, and hope. Catherine added, "We want every person fighting cancer to know that they are not alone. Not in their fears, not in their struggles, and not in their hope for the future. Our experience has shown us that healing happens not just in our bodies, but in our connections to each other." As they walked toward their car, a young boy broke away from his parents and ran toward Catherine. Security moved to intercept, but Catherine gestured for them to let him approach. The boy, perhaps 6 years old and wearing a baseball cap to cover his hairless head, simply wanted to give her a drawing he had made. It showed a stick figure in a crown and cape with the words "Thank you for being brave" written in crayon. Catherine knelt down and accepted the drawing with the same ceremony she might show to a state gift. "This is beautiful," she told him. "What's your name?" "Oliver," he said shyly. "My mom said you were sick like me, but now you're better." "That's right, Oliver. And you're going to be better too." As their car pulled away from the hospital, both Catherine and Charles felt emotionally drained, but spiritually recharged. The visit had accomplished something beyond the typical royal engagement. It had created genuine connections, provided real comfort to people facing difficult circumstances, and established a new model for how their royal platform could be used to address serious social issues. The afternoon brought them to a research facility where scientists were working on immunotherapy treatments. The contrast between the hospital's focus on patient care and the laboratory's emphasis on future breakthroughs provided a complete picture of the fight against cancer. Catherine found herself particularly interested in research into pediatric cancers, while Charles was drawn to studies on cancer prevention and early detection. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, lead researcher on a promising immunotherapy trial, explained how their work was showing remarkable results in treating previously resistant cancers.
5 years ago, some of these patients would have had very limited options. Now we're seeing complete remissions in cases that would have been considered hopeless.
The technical discussions were complex, but both royals followed along with genuine interest. Their experience as patients had given them a deep appreciation for the scientific process behind their treatment. They asked detailed questions about funding, timelines, and the challenges of bringing new treatments from laboratory to clinic. As the day concluded, Catherine and Charles traveled back to Windsor Castle in comfortable silence, both processing the emotional intensity of their return to public life. They had accomplished something significant, not just in terms of royal duty, but in terms of human connection and social impact. Their cancer diagnoses had initially seemed like private tragedies, but today had transformed them into platforms for public service in a way they had never anticipated. The evening news coverage was extensive, but for once, the focus wasn't on fashion choices or protocol. Instead, journalists reported on the substantive conversations, the research initiatives discussed, and the visible hope that the royal presence had brought to patients and families. Social media filled with messages of support and gratitude, many from cancer patients around the world who felt represented and encouraged by what they had witnessed. As Catherine tucked her children into bed that night, Prince Louis asked if she was completely better now. She thought carefully before answering. "I'm much better, and I'm getting stronger every day. But more importantly, today I learned that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing important things even when you are scared." The first day of their return had exceeded everyone's expectations. They had successfully balanced their royal roles with their personal experiences, created meaningful connections with people facing similar challenges, and established a new paradigm for how their positions could be used to address serious health issues. Tomorrow would bring new engagements and new opportunities to serve, but tonight they could rest knowing that their journey through illness had prepared them for a more profound and impactful form of royal service than they had ever imagined possible.
3 weeks after their emotional return to public life, Catherine and King Charles had settled into a new rhythm of royal duties that balanced their commitment to service with their ongoing health needs. The palace had announced a modified schedule that would allow both royals to maintain their energy while fulfilling their most important obligations.
This careful approach had become a model for how public figures could return to work after serious illness. The transformation in their approach to royal duties was evident to everyone around them. Palace staff noticed that both Catherine and Charles brought a new depth of empathy to their interactions with the public. Their experience with vulnerability had stripped away some of the formal distance that traditionally separated royalty from ordinary people, creating connections that felt more authentic and meaningful.
On this particular morning, Catherine was preparing for a visit to a women's shelter in East London. The facility housed mothers and children fleeing domestic violence, and Catherine had specifically requested to include such venues in her return schedule.
Her own experience of feeling vulnerable and uncertain had given her a deeper understanding of what it meant to face life's challenges without adequate support systems. The shelter's director, Maria Santos, had been working with vulnerable families for 12 years, but she was nervous about the royal visit,
Not because of protocol concerns, but because she wanted to ensure that the visit would genuinely benefit the women and children in their care, rather than simply serving as a photo opportunity. Maria had spent hours preparing with her staff, discussing how to make the visit meaningful and comfortable for everyone involved.
As Catherine's car pulled up to the modest building in a busy London neighborhood, she could see curious faces peering out of windows. The shelter housed 15 families at any given time, and today, many of the children were pressed against the glass, excited about seeing a real princess. Catherine smiled, remembering her own children's fascination with royal stories and fairy tales. Inside, the shelter's common room had been arranged with comfortable seating where Catherine could meet with some of the residents. The women who chose to participate had varying reasons for being there, but they shared the common experience of having to rebuild their lives from nothing, often while protecting and caring for young children.
38-year-old Sarah Mitchell sat quietly in the corner, her 4-year-old daughter Lucy playing with toys nearby. Sarah had arrived at the shelter 6 months earlier, after finally finding the courage to leave an abusive relationship.
She was still struggling with feelings of shame and failure, despite the support of the shelter staff. When Catherine entered the room, Sarah was struck by how normal and approachable the princess looked.
"I don't really know what to say to a princess," Sarah admitted when Catherine sat down beside her. "My life is pretty far from a fairy tale right now."
Catherine's response surprised everyone in the room.
Honestly, mine hasn't felt much like a fairy tale lately either. Sometimes the hardest part about difficult situations is feeling like you're the only one going through them, when actually, struggling is a very normal part of being human.
Their conversation continued for 20 minutes, covering topics from parenting challenges to finding strength during dark times. Catherine shared, appropriately and carefully, some of her own experiences with fear and uncertainty during her illness.
Not the medical details, but the emotional journey of not knowing what the future would hold and having to find courage day by day. Lucy, who had been shyly observing from her mother's lap, eventually worked up the courage to show Catherine her favorite stuffed animal, a worn rabbit named Mr. Hoppy.
Catherine admired the toy with genuine interest, asking about his adventures and listening seriously to Lucy's elaborate stories. These moments of connection with children always reminded Catherine why her work mattered beyond ceremony and tradition.
Meanwhile, across London, King Charles was visiting a community centre in South London that provided services for elderly residents, many of whom lived alone. The centre offered everything from meal programs to social activities, addressing the growing problem of isolation among older adults. Charles had always been interested in issues affecting the elderly, but his recent health experience had given him a more personal understanding of vulnerability and the importance of community support. The center's main hall buzzed with activity as residents participated in various programs. A small group was engaged in a painting class while others played cards or simply chatted over tea and biscuits. Charles moved through the room slowly, stopping to observe the art projects and join conversations naturally. 82-year-old Frank Thompson had been attending the center for 3 years, ever since his wife passed away. Frank had served in the Royal Navy for 25 years and maintained a gruff exterior that hid his loneliness. When Charles approached his table where Frank was working on a watercolor painting of a seascape, the conversation began with military service but quickly moved to more personal territory. "Lost my missus 3 years ago," Frank said matter-of-factly while adding blue paint to his canvas. 47 years married, and then suddenly you're eating dinner alone every night. This place, well, it keeps you from going completely mad with your own thoughts." Charles nodded with understanding. "I spent quite a bit of time alone with my thoughts during my treatment. It can be overwhelming, can't it? The silence gives you too much space to worry about things you can't control." Frank looked up from his painting, studying Charles's face.
You really get it, don't you? It's not just about being polite and making conversation. You actually understand what it feels like.
Their discussion continued as Frank worked on his painting, covering topics from grief and loss to finding meaning in life's later chapters. Charles found himself genuinely interested in Frank's military stories and his perspective on aging.
By the time their conversation ended, Frank had invited Charles to return sometime, not as a royal duty, but simply as someone who might appreciate seeing how the seascape painting progressed. Back at the women's shelter, Catherine was participating in a group discussion about rebuilding confidence after trauma. The conversation was led by Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist who volunteered at the shelter weekly. 8 women sat in a circle sharing their experiences and supporting each other through their recovery process. The discussion naturally turned to identity and self-worth. Many of the women talked about how their abusive relationships had made them doubt their own judgment and value. They described the process of rediscovering who they were outside of those harmful relationships and the challenge of building new lives while healing from psychological wounds. Catherine listened intently, occasionally sharing insights from her own experience of having her identity challenged by illness. "When I was diagnosed, I suddenly had to redefine what it meant to be strong," she said.
I had always thought strength meant being able to handle everything perfectly, never showing weakness. But going through cancer taught me that real strength is being honest about your struggles and accepting help when you need it.
One of the younger women, 19-year-old Emma, spoke about feeling judged by people who didn't understand why she had stayed in an abusive relationship for so long. "People act like it should have been simple to just leave, like I was stupid for staying. They don't understand how complicated it gets in your head." Catherine responded thoughtfully.
People often judge situations they haven't experienced themselves.
During my treatment, I was amazed by how many people had opinions about what I should do or how I should handle things.
But only the people who had been through cancer themselves really understood the complexity of the decisions I was facing. The parallel wasn't exact, but the underlying message resonated with the group.
The idea that outsiders often oversimplify complex situations, and that understanding comes from shared experience rather than theoretical knowledge, provided validation for women who had been questioning their own decisions and judgments. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine participated in activities with the children while their mothers attended a job skills workshop.
The shelter's playroom was filled with the chaos and energy of a dozen children ranging from toddlers to teenagers. Catherine found herself naturally gravitating toward the role of playground supervisor, mediating disputes over toys and organizing impromptu games.
9-year-old Marcus, whose mother had arrived at the shelter just 2 weeks earlier, was initially suspicious of Catherine. He had learned not to trust adults too quickly, and the idea of a princess visiting seemed too fantastical to be real. But when Catherine joined in a game of building blocks without making a big deal about it, Marcus began to warm up to her.
"Are you really a princess?"
He asked while they constructed an elaborate castle together. "I am, but I'm also a mom, just like your mom. And I think being a mom is actually more important than being a princess." Marcus considered this seriously.
"My mom cries sometimes at night. She thinks I can't hear, but I can."
Catherine's heart ached for both Marcus and his mother. Moms cry sometimes when they're worried about keeping their kids safe and happy.
It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It means your mom loves you very much.
Their conversation continued as they built, with Marcus gradually sharing more about his feelings and fears. Catherine found herself drawing on her own children's questions during her illness, remembering how important it had been to be honest while still providing reassurance. Evening brought both Catherine and Charles back to Windsor Castle, where they shared dinner and discussed their day's experiences. These conversations had become an important part of their new routine, helping them process the emotional intensity of their public engagements while planning how to use their experiences most effectively. "The women at the shelter today," Catherine said as they sat in their private dining room, "they're incredibly strong, but they don't see it in themselves yet. They're rebuilding their entire lives from scratch while caring for children and healing from trauma."
"It's remarkable, really." Charles nodded, understanding the parallel to their own recovery process. "The elderly gentleman I met today, Frank, said something interesting. He said that the worst part about getting older wasn't the physical limitations, but the way society stops seeing you as having anything valuable to contribute." He felt invisible until he started coming to the community center. Their discussion evolved into planning for future engagements and initiatives. Both had ideas for ways to expand their work with the populations they had visited. Catherine was interested in developing programs that would provide ongoing support for families transitioning out of shelters, while Charles wanted to explore innovative approaches to addressing social isolation among the elderly. Palace staff had noticed the change in how Catherine and Charles approached their work.
Their questions about potential engagements had become more focused and specific. Instead of simply asking about logistics and protocol, they wanted to know about outcomes and impact. Their illness had taught them that time was precious, and they wanted to ensure that their efforts created meaningful change rather than just positive publicity. The evening news coverage of their visits focused on the substance of their interactions rather than the ceremonial aspects. Journalists reported on the real conversations and connections they had witnessed, and the coverage generated significant public interest in the issues they had highlighted. Donations to both the women's shelter and the community center increased substantially in the days following the visits. As Catherine prepared for bed that night, she reflected on how much her understanding of her royal role had evolved.
Before her illness, she had seen her duty as representing the crown with grace and dignity, supporting causes through her presence and patronage. Now she understood that her greatest contribution might be using her experience with vulnerability to create genuine connections with people facing their own challenges.
Her illness had initially felt like an interruption to her royal duties, a private crisis that would temporarily derail her public service. Instead, it had become the foundation for a more meaningful and impactful approach to her work. She was no longer just visiting people and organizations as an honored guest. She was connecting with them as fellow human beings who understood struggle and resilience. Charles, too, had discovered that his cancer diagnosis, while initially feeling like a threat to his ability to serve as king, had actually enhanced his capacity for leadership. His experience with mortality and vulnerability had made him more relatable and more effective in his interactions with people from all walks of life. He approached his constitutional duties with the same dedication as before, but his understanding of his role as a symbol and servant of the people had deepened significantly.
The 3 months of their cancer treatment, which had once seemed like time stolen from their royal duties, now appeared to have been an essential preparation for a new phase of service. Their return to public life wasn't just about resuming their previous responsibilities. It was about beginning a more authentic and impactful approach to royal duty that would influence their work for years to come.
As they settled into sleep that night, both Catherine and Charles felt a profound sense of purpose. Their journey through illness had been difficult and frightening, but it had also been transformative.
They had emerged not just as cancer survivors, but as more effective servants of the people they were privileged to represent. Their return to public life marked not an end to their cancer experience, but the beginning of a new chapter in their royal service that would be informed by everything they had learned about courage, vulnerability, and the power of human connection in the face of life's greatest challenges.